The third-grade classroom was a sanctuary of construction paper and the faint, waxy smell of crayons. For Alara Vance, it was a fortress against the memory of a life that had once been filled with whispered promises, and a heartbreak so profound it had shaped her into the woman she was today. A woman who preferred the straightforward honesty of children's math problems to the complicated, often painful, equations of the adult heart. She moved between the small desks, her sensible flats quiet on the scuffed linoleum, collecting the week's homework on ancient Greek myths. It was Friday afternoon, the air thick with the promise of the weekend and the restless energy of 28 eight-year-olds. "Remember to write your names, everyone. Jason, that means you too," she called out, her voice warm but firm. The children, a chaotic bundle of flying backpacks and shouted goodbyes, finally emptied into the hallway, leaving behind the sudden, ringing silence of an empty school. Alara sighed, sinking into her chair and taking a sip of lukewarm coffee from her world's best teacher mug, a gift from a student who had, in fact, been one of her most challenging. She began to stack the papers, her eyes automatically checking for legibility, for completed sentences, for the telltale signs of a parent having done the work instead of the child. It was a familiar ritual. Then she picked up Leo's homework. Leo Valenti, a quiet, intense boy with watchful dark eyes and a stillness that set him apart from his boisterous peers. He was new to the school, his file sparse, the emergency contact listed simply as L. Valenti, father. She'd never met him. Parent-teacher conferences had been declined via a terse email from an assistant. She smoothed the paper. The assignment was to write 3 sentences about their favorite hero. Leo had chosen Odysseus. "My hero is Odysseus because he was smart and used his brain to win. He never gave up, even when it was hard. He always wanted to go home to his family." The sentences were simple, an 8-year-old's effort. But the handwriting? Alara's breath caught in her throat. Her coffee mug froze halfway to her lips. It wasn't the child's clumsy, large-lettered script. This was the work of an adult. The letters were sharp, elegant, and slanted with a distinct, almost aggressive flair. It was a hand she knew, a hand she had traced with her fingers by candlelight, committing each loop and slash to memory a lifetime ago. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs, a frantic, painful rhythm. It couldn't be. It was impossible. Time spun backwards, violently yanking her out of the safe, sunlit classroom and into the dim, book-scented haze of a university library. 10 years passed. She was 20 again, buried in textbooks, her life a predictable path toward a graduate degree in literature. And then the letters started appearing, slipped into her assigned Carol, left between the pages of her notebook, tucked under the windshield wiper of her beat-up sedan. They were never signed. They were written on heavy, expensive cream paper, in that same distinctive, sharp handwriting. They weren't overtly romantic. They were observations, intellectual seductions. "I saw you today, arguing with Professor Higgins about the moral ambiguity in Gatsby. Your eyes were on fire. You were magnificent. Or you drank your coffee black. I imagine you appreciate things in their pure, unadulterated form. No false sweetness. They were unnerving, thrilling, and deeply flattering. For 6 months, the anonymous correspondent was the most compelling mystery of her life. She'd look for him in lecture halls, in coffee shops, her heart leaping at every tall, dark-haired man. She'd even kept the letters, tied with a silk ribbon in a box at the back of her closet, a relic of a time when she'd believed in grand, sweeping, secret romance. And then, as suddenly as they began, they stopped. The last letter was different, shorter, final. "They are sending me away. Forgetting me is the kindest thing you can do. Please." And that was it. The mystery man vanished, leaving behind a ghost that had haunted her for a decade. She had built a life since then, a sensible, quiet life. She had abandoned her PhD, finding the world of theory too abstract, too bloodless after the intensity of those letters. She'd found solace in the concrete needs of children, in the simple truths of multiplication tables and spelling tests. She had convinced herself she was over it, over him. But now, here, in the innocent scrawl of a 3rd-grade homework assignment, his ghost had reached out and grabbed her by the throat. "Leo Valenti, L. Valenti." Her hands trembled, the paper rattling softly. The father. The anonymous writer from her past was Leo's father. And if the rumors she'd heard in the teacher's lounge were true, if the whispered tales about the reclusive, powerful Valenti family held even a shred of truth, Then the man who had written her those beautiful, haunting letters was no graduate student. He was a king, a criminal king. The bell for after-school clubs jangled, making her jump. She stared at Leo's homework as if it were a live wire. What did she do now? Grade it? Pretend she'd seen nothing? The past wasn't just the past anymore. It was sitting on a desk in her classroom 5 days a week. It had his father's eyes, and it had just handed her a secret that could shatter the careful peace she had built for herself. The weekend was a blur of fractured nerves and sleepless nights. Leo's homework paper sat on her coffee table like an indictment, the sharp, elegant script seeming to mock her from across the room. She tried to rationalize it. Handwriting could be similar. It was a coincidence, a cruel trick of memory, and a tired mind. But she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it was him. The particular flourish on the capital M, the way the Y swooped down like a dagger, was etched into her soul. She was due to see him. The annual Fathers and Figures school breakfast was on Monday morning. A sickening cocktail of dread and a traitorous, long-buried thrill churned in her stomach. Monday arrived, and the school hallway transformed into a chaotic, cheerful sea of fathers and children. The air smelled of cheap coffee and aftershave. Alara moved through the crowd on autopilot, her smile a practiced professional mask. She greeted her students, shook hands with dads, her eyes constantly scanning, searching for a pair of watchful dark eyes that were no longer a boy's. And then she saw him. He was standing near the punch bowl, a head taller than most of the men in the room. He wasn't trying to command attention. He did, a stillness at the center of the noise. He wore a simple, exquisitely tailored dark suit, no tie. He looked older. The lean youth of his 20s hardened into the powerful, solid frame of a man in his prime. The years had carved his face, sharpening his jawline and etching faint lines around his eyes. But he was undeniably, heart-stoppingly, the same. Lorenzo Valenti. Leo stood beside him, a miniature, quieter version, clinging to his father's hand. Lorenzo's gaze swept the room with detached, analytical calm until it landed on her, and stopped. For a fraction of a second, the cool composure on his face shattered. His eyes, a dark, stormy gray she remembered drowning in, widened infinitesimally. There was a flash of pure, unadulterated shock, followed by a dawning recognition so intense it felt like a physical blow across the crowded room. He hadn't known. He hadn't known she was his son's teacher. The world narrowed to the space between them. The noise of the cafeteria faded into a dull roar. He recovered quickly, the mask of impassive control snapping back into place, but his eyes remained locked on hers, burning with a question, a memory, 1,000 unspoken words. He began to move toward her, cutting through the crowd with a predator's grace that made people instinctively step aside. Leo trailed in his wake. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice exactly as she remembered it from her dreams. A low baritone, smooth as aged whiskey, with a rasp that curled around her name like a caress. It was the voice she'd imagined reading those letters. "Mr. Valenti," she managed, her own voice sounding thin and reedy. She forced her professional smile. "It's a pleasure to meet you finally. Leo is a wonderful student." She looked down at Leo, who gave her a shy smile. "Very bright, and very dedicated." "He speaks highly of you," Lorenzo replied, his gaze never leaving her face. It was a physical weight, assessing, remembering. "He says you make the Greek myths sound like adventures, not old stories." "Well, they are adventures," she said, her mind screaming, "It's you." "It's really you!" But her teacher training held. "We were just discussing Odysseus last week. Leo wrote a very insightful piece of homework." She let the sentence hang, a deliberate hook. She saw his eyes flicker. He understood the reference. He knew she knew. A ghost of a smile, sharp and knowing, touched his lips. Odysseus was a man of many journeys, and many secrets. The double meaning hung in the air between them, thick and charged. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a crisp white business card. He didn't have a pen. He held it out to her. "If there are ever any concerns about Leo's progress," he said, his tone formal, but his eyes promising something else entirely. "My direct line." She took the card. It was heavy, expensive cardstock. It bore only a name, Lorenzo Valenti, and a phone number. No title, no company, just him. Their fingers brushed during the exchange. A jolt, electric and terrifyingly familiar, shot up her arm. She flinched, nearly dropping the card. His smile widened, just a fraction. He knew the effect he had on her. He'd always known. "It was a pleasure, Ms. Vance," he said again, the words a deliberate, intimate echo. He placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. "Come, Leo, we should find you some pancakes." And just like that, he turned and melted back into the crowd, leaving her standing there, the business card burning a hole in her palm, the phantom touch of his skin seared into her own. The anonymous writer from her past was no longer a ghost. He was flesh and blood. He was the father of her student. And he was, without a doubt, the most dangerous man she had ever met. The school day passed in a haze. She taught her lessons. She supervised recess. But her mind was 1,000 miles away, trapped in a library carrel, surrounded by the ghost of his words. That evening, alone in her apartment, she took the box of letters out of her closet. The silk ribbon was dusty. With trembling hands, she untied it and spread the cream-colored pages on her floor. She laid Leo's homework beside them. It was a perfect match. The same hand. The same man. He had found her again. Or rather, fate had delivered her to him. She looked at the business card on her coffee table. It was an invitation. A summons. What did he want? To reminisce? To warn her off? To pick up where they had left off a decade ago? Every instinct told her to throw the card away, to pretend this had never happened. But the part of her that had never gotten over the mystery, the part that had saved every single letter, that same foolish romantic heart whispered a single, dangerous word: call him. The business card sat on her nightstand for 3 days, a siren's call she resisted with every shred of her self-preservation. She was a teacher. He was, what? A criminal? A phantom? The man who had broken her heart, without ever giving her the courtesy of a face-to-face goodbye. She graded papers, planned lessons, and tried to immerse herself in the simple, predictable world of 3rd grade. But it was no use. Leo's presence in her classroom was a constant, quiet reminder. The boy was a living link to the past, and every time she looked at him, she saw his father's stormy eyes. On the 4th day, a Friday, she broke. It was late, the school long empty, the silence of her apartment pressing in on her. The curiosity, the unresolved ache of a decade, was a physical pain. Before she could talk herself out of it, she picked up her phone and dialed the number. It rang only once. Alara. His voice was calm, as if he'd been expecting her call. He didn't ask who it was. He knew. The sound of her name on his lips, spoken with such intimate certainty, stole the air from her lungs. "How did you know it was me?" she whispered. "I have only given this number to one person this week," he replied, his tone laced with a dark amusement. There was a pause. "I wondered if you would call." "The letters," she said, the words tumbling out. "It was you. It was me." The admission was simple, stark. No denial, no explanation. Just truth. Why? The question was a plea, torn from the confused, hurt girl she'd once been. Why the secrecy? Why did you stop? He was silent for a long moment. She could hear the soft sound of his breathing. "It was a complicated time. My father was dying. The responsibilities I had avoided were being forced upon me. The world I was entering was not a world for a woman like you. Not then." His voice softened. "You were light, Alara. Pure, intellectual light. I was being swallowed by darkness. Letting you go was the only noble thing I have ever done." The explanation, delivered with such raw honesty, dismantled her anger. It wasn't a rejection. It had been a protection. A brutal, misguided, but ultimately protective act. "You broke my heart," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I know," he murmured, "and I have regretted it every day since." The confession hung between them, a bridge across 10 years of silence. "Leo," she began, unsure of what to ask. "His mother? It's not in the picture," he said, his tone final, closing that door firmly. "It is just Leo and me." Another silence, this one heavier, weighed down by their present reality. "I would like to see you," he said, his voice dropping, becoming more intimate, to talk, properly, not at a school function surrounded by children and their fathers. It was a terrible idea. A catastrophic, professionally ruinous, potentially dangerous idea. But the part of her that had never stopped wondering, never stopped missing the intellectual thrill of his mind, was screaming yes. "Where?" she breathed, already lost. "I'll send a car for you tomorrow night. 8 o'clock. He didn't ask if she was free. He didn't need to. He knew she would be. Wear something comfortable. The line went dead. The next 24 hours were a fever dream. She told herself she was a fool, dancing with a devil she knew nothing about. But another part of her, the part that had felt more alive in those 5 minutes on the phone than she had in years, was thrumming with a terrifying anticipation. Saturday night, at precisely 8, a silent black sedan pulled up outside her apartment. The driver, a large, impassive man, held the door for her without a word. They drove to the wealthiest part of the city, to a building she'd only ever seen in architectural magazines. The penthouse elevator opened directly into his home. It was nothing like she'd expected. It wasn't a cold, minimalist fortress. It was warm, filled with books and art, the walls a deep, soothing color. It felt like a home, a lived-in, loved home. And there he was, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights spread out behind him like a fallen galaxy. He was out of his suit, wearing dark jeans and a simple black sweater that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. He looked more approachable and somehow more dangerous. "Alara," he said, turning as she entered. His gaze swept over her, taking in her simple dress, and something hot and appreciative flashed in his eyes. "You look exactly as I remember." He gestured to a sofa. "Please." He poured her a glass of wine, his movements fluid and sure. They sat, a careful distance between them, the air crackling with unsaid things. "Why now?" she asked, clutching her glass. "After all this time? Why, when I happen to be your son's teacher?" He took a slow sip of his whiskey. "Fate is not always subtle," he said. "When I saw you in that cafeteria, it was like being handed back a piece of my soul I thought I'd lost forever." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. "I am not the boy who wrote you those letters, Alara. I am a man with complexities, with enemies, with a life that is not safe. But seeing you again, it made me want to be that boy again, just for a night." He was offering her a glimpse behind the curtain, a confession of his own vulnerability. It was the most seductive thing he could have done. They talked, for hours. They talked about the books they'd read, the plays they'd seen, the 10 years that had stretched between them. The intellectual connection was still there, a live wire that hummed between them, stronger and more potent than ever. The mystery was gone, replaced by the complex, compelling reality of the man he had become. As the night wore on, the careful distance on the sofa vanished. They were leaning closer, drawn together by an invisible force. His hand reached out, his fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, a spark that ignited the tension that had been building all evening. "I never stopped thinking about you," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Those letters, they were the most honest part of my life." Her resolve, her fear, her common sense crumbled to dust. She leaned in and kissed him. It was not a gentle reunion. It was a conflagration. A decade of longing, of unanswered questions, of heartbreak, exploded in that single, searing contact. It was a claiming and a surrender, all at once. When they broke apart, they were both breathless. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "Stay," he breathed. It wasn't a command. It was a plea, and she knew, with a terrifying, wonderful certainty, that her quiet, safe life was over. She stayed. The decision was made not in her mind, but in her blood, in the memory of his letters and the reality of his kiss. The night was a blur of whispered confessions and rediscovered intimacy, a bridge built across a decade of silence. Waking in his bed, in the pale light of dawn, with his arm a heavy, possessive weight across her waist, felt both terrifyingly new and achingly familiar. This was the man whose words had haunted her. This was the body that had been only a phantom. He was real, and she was in his world now. The morning after was a study in surreal domesticity. Leo, already dressed and eating cereal at the massive kitchen island, looked up with wide, curious eyes as she emerged from the hallway in yesterday's clothes. "Good morning, Ms. Vance," he said, his tone neutral. "Good morning, Leo," she replied, her cheeks flushing. Lorenzo was at the stove, effortlessly flipping pancakes. He looked completely at ease, a king in his kitchen. He glanced over his shoulder, a slow, intimate smile gracing his lips when he saw her. "Coffee's on the counter." It was all so normal, so deceptively simple. They ate breakfast together, the three of them. Leo chattered about a video game. Lorenzo listened with a father's quiet attention, and Alara felt as if she were in a dream. This was the family she had never dared to imagine for herself, built around a man she was only beginning to know truly. He drove her home himself later that morning, the silence in the car comfortable, charged with the new understanding between them. He walked her to her door. "This changes things," he said, his voice low. "For Leo, for us." "I know," she whispered. He cupped her face. "I am not a safe man to love, Alara, but I will spend every day of my life making sure you are safe with me." He kissed her, a soft, promising kiss, then turned and walked away. The following week was a delicate, nerve-wracking dance. At school, she was Ms. Vance, Leo's teacher. She was careful, professional, giving him no special treatment. But now, when she looked at him, she saw the echo of his father's smile, the shape of his jaw. She saw her future. After school, her life belonged to Lorenzo. Their relationship unfolded in the privacy of his penthouse, a world away from the crayons and construction paper of her classroom. He was a man of contradictions, ruthless in business, yet tender with his son, capable of chilling commands on the phone, yet he would listen to her talk about her day with a focus that made her feel like the most important person in the world. He began to share his world with her, not the dark underbelly, but the legitimate empire he was building, the import-export firms, the real estate holdings, the charitable foundation he ran in his mother's name. He was showing her the man he was becoming, the man he wanted to be for her. One evening, as they were looking through his art collection, he stopped before a small, unassuming landscape. "This was my mother's favorite," he said quietly. "She loved quiet things, peaceful." He looked at her. "Like you." It was the highest compliment he could have paid her. She was learning that his love wasn't expressed in grand public gestures, but in these small, profound admissions. He was letting her see the cracks in his armor, the vulnerable man beneath the dawn. A month into their clandestine relationship, he took her to the opera. It was their first real public appearance, a calculated risk. He wanted the world to see them together. He wanted there to be no doubt. As they sat in his private box, his hand resting on her knee, she felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on them. The speculation, the curiosity. She was no longer just a teacher. She was Lorenzo Valenti's woman. At the intermission, a sleek older man with cold eyes approached. "Lorenzo," the man said, his gaze flicking dismissively over Alara. "I see you've acquired a new distraction. Charming." Lorenzo's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her knee. His smile was a razor blade. "Antonio, my fiancée, Alara Vance, is indeed charming, but she is hardly a distraction. She is the reason your proposal for the Docklands development will be rejected by the city council tomorrow." The man, Antonio, paled. "You bluff, do I?" Lorenzo's voice was lethally soft. "Check your phone." A moment later, a text message buzzed on Antonio's phone. He read it, his face turning ashen. He looked at Alara with new, fearful eyes. He saw the mind behind the distraction. He saw the threat. He left without another word. Lorenzo turned to her, his eyes blazing with pride. "And so they learn," he murmured. The drive home was quiet. "That man, Antonio," she began. "A rival," Lorenzo said. "A man who thought my affection for you was a weakness. He needed to be corrected." He looked at her. "Does that frighten you?" She thought about it. The cold efficiency of his power should have terrified her. But all she felt was a fierce, protective pride. He had defended her. He had claimed her. "No," she said, her voice steady. "It doesn't." He brought her hand to his lips. "Good." That night, as they lay in his bed, he traced the line of her spine. "Move in with me," he said, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "Bring your life here. Let me come home to you every night." It was the final step. The end of her old life, the beginning of their life together. She thought of her quiet apartment, her safe, predictable routine. She thought of the lonely nights before him. She looked at this complicated, dangerous, beautiful man who loved her with a ferocity that stole her breath. "Yes," she whispered. Her life as just a teacher was over. She was becoming something else entirely, and she had never been more certain of anything in her life. Moving in was less a relocation and more an absorption. Her modest belongings looked like lonely artifacts in the sprawling, elegant space of his penthouse, but Lorenzo treated each one with a reverence that made her heart ache. The fireplace gave her favorite reading chair a place of honor. Her books were integrated into his library. He was not just making space for her. He was weaving her into the very fabric of his life, of his home. Leo's reaction was one of quiet, profound joy. He now had a constant playmate for his board games, a willing audience for his stories, and a maternal presence that had been absent from his life. He started calling her Ilara at home, a small, significant step away from the formality of Ms. Vance. The three of them fell into a comfortable, joyful rhythm. Weekday mornings were a whirlwind of school preparation, and evenings were for shared dinners where Leo recounted his day and Lorenzo listened, his sharp eyes soft with paternal pride. It was the family she had never dared to dream of, built on a foundation that was both rock-solid and terrifyingly fragile. She learned the rhythms of his other life, the one that existed in the shadows. She learned to recognize the particular tension in Luca's shoulders when a threat was imminent, the subtle shift in Lorenzo's tone during certain phone calls that meant he was issuing commands that could end lives or fortunes. He never hid it from her. He trusted her with the truth of what he was. And in doing so, he made her his accomplice, his partner. Her love for him became intertwined with a fierce, protective loyalty. One afternoon, she was working on lesson plans at the dining table when Lorenzo returned home early. His face was a mask of cold fury, a storm held in check by sheer willpower. He went straight to his study without a word. She gave him 10 minutes, then followed with a cup of coffee. He was standing at the window, his back to her, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists on the sill. "Lorenzo?" He didn't turn. "They threatened him," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. A rival family. They implied they could get to Leo, to get to me. The air left her lungs. A cold, primal fear, sharper than any she had ever felt for herself, seized her. Leo. Her mind flashed to his small, serious face, his quiet laughter. "What are you going to do?" she whispered. He finally turned. The look in his eyes was absolute, terrifying. "I am going to burn their world to the ground." He walked to his desk, his movements lethally precise. "They will learn that my family is not a weapon to be used against me. It is the reason I will erase them from the earth." He began typing a rapid message on his encrypted phone. This was not the businessman or the doting father. This was the Don, the king, and he was preparing for war. She didn't flinch. She didn't plead for mercy or peace. She walked to his side and placed her hand over his on the phone, stopping him. He looked up, surprised. "Then we burn it together," she said, her voice quiet but iron steady. "But we do it smart. Not with bullets, but with bankruptcy. You once told me my mind was a weapon. Let me use it." She had seen their financials. She knew their weak points. The shipping company was a front, the restaurant chain they used for money laundering. "Let me help you dismantle them. Permanently." A slow, fierce smile spread across his face, a predator recognizing his mate. He pulled her into a hard, desperate kiss. "Yes," he breathed against her lips. "Together." For the next 72 hours, they were a war council of two. She pored over financial documents and corporate structures, her analytical mind finding the cracks he had overlooked. He provided the muscle, the intimidation, the ruthless execution of her strategy. They were an unstoppable force. Bank loans were called in, and business licenses were mysteriously revoked. Key associates were offered lucrative, legitimate jobs within Lorenzo's empire, stripping the rival family of its talent. It was a silent, bloodless coup that left their enemies financially crippled and utterly defeated. The threat to Leo evaporated. When it was over, they stood together on the terrace, exhausted and triumphant. The city slept below, unaware of the war that had just been won in its midst. He pulled her close, his face buried in her hair. "You are my queen," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "My partner in everything." The victory solidified her place not just in his heart, but in his world. There was no more speculation. She was Signora Vance, the teacher who had tamed the untamable Lorenzo Valenti. She was the woman whose intelligence was as formidable as her beauty. The woman who stood beside the king and helped him rule. A week later, on a night filled with the scent of night-blooming jasmine from the terrace planters, he led her to the library, He went to a locked cabinet behind his desk, a place she had never seen him open. Inside, nestled on velvet, was a simple wooden box. He brought it to her. "Open it," he said softly. With trembling hands, she lifted the lid. Inside, neatly tied with a faded silk ribbon, were every single letter she had ever written back to him. Not the originals, those were hers, still in her box at home. These were copies. Perfect handwritten copies. In his script. She looked up at him, her eyes swimming with tears. "You kept them?" "I told you," he said, his voice rough. "They were the most honest part of my life. When I had to let you go, copying your words, it was the only way I could keep a piece of you with me. It was the only way to survive." He took the box from her and set it aside. Then he dropped to one knee. Her heart stopped. He took her left hand in his. "Elara Vance," he began, his stormy eyes holding hers, baring his soul. "You were the ghost who haunted my best years. You are the woman who saved me in my darkest hour. You are the strength behind my throne, and the love that fills my home." He pulled a ring from his pocket. It was an antique, a central square-cut diamond surrounded by sapphires the color of a twilight sky. "This was my grandmother's. She was a woman of immense strength and grace. Like you." He took a deep breath. "Marry me. Make this family official. Let me spend the rest of my life being the man you make me want to be." She looked at the ring, a symbol of a legacy she was now part of. She looked at this man, her anonymous pen pal, her student's father, her lover, her partner in war and peace. There were no more secrets, no more ghosts, just this brilliant, certain future. "Yes," she breathed the word of vow. "Yes, Lorenzo, always." He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. As he stood to kiss her, the door to the library creaked open. Leo stood there, his face alight with a knowing smile. "Does this mean Elara is staying forever?" he asked. Lorenzo looked from his son's hopeful face to the love shining in Elara's eyes. "Yes, son," he said, his voice filled with a joy so profound it was almost painful. Forever. The engagement ring was more than a promise. It was a coronation. The news, though kept discreet, sent ripples through both the glittering social circles and the shadowy underworld. The teacher had not just tamed the beast. She had been crowned its queen. Elara Vance was now Elara Conti to be, a fact that was met with a mixture of awe, envy, and a new, grudging respect. Her life transformed completely. She continued teaching, a decision Lorenzo supported without question. It was her sanctuary, her tether to the normal world, and a powerful statement that his empire would not entirely absorb her. But now, a sleek black sedan driven by Luca or one of his men dropped her off and picked her up each day. Her classroom became the most secure third-grade room in the city, though her students remained blissfully unaware. Leo, now knowing she was to be his stepmother, blossomed. The last vestiges of his quiet reserve fell away, replaced by a confident, happy boy who proudly told his classmates that his teacher was going to be part of his family. The wedding was a small, breathtaking affair held at a private villa on the Amalfi coast, far from prying eyes and potential threats. Only Lorenzo's most trusted inner circle and a handful of Elara's closest friends and family were present. She wore a simple, elegant gown of ivory silk, and he looked at her as if she were the only person who had ever existed. As they exchanged vows under a flower-strewn pergola overlooking the sea, with Leo standing proudly as the ring-bearer, Elara knew this was the culmination of every secret hope she'd ever harbored since that first mysterious letter. They were no longer a secret. They were a dynasty. Married life was an intensification of everything that had come before. The love, the partnership, the shared purpose. Lorenzo involved her in everything, from the most mundane domestic decisions to the most complex strategic moves of his legitimate businesses. She was his equal in every way that mattered. One evening, about a year into their marriage, they were hosting a small dinner party for a few business associates and their wives. The conversation was light, focused on art and travel. Elara was discussing a recent exhibition when she noticed one of the wives, a delicate, nervous woman named Isabella, staring at her with an unusual intensity. Later, as the women were having coffee in the lounge, Isabella approached her. "Your ring," Isabella said softly, her eyes fixed on the antique diamond and sapphires. "It's exquisite. It looks so familiar." Elara smiled. "It was my husband's grandmother's." Isabella's face paled slightly. The Conti grandmother, Sophia? Yes, Alara said, surprised. You knew her? Isabella gave a tight, nervous smile. My family moved in similar circles, a long time ago. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. She was a formidable woman. They said she was the true power behind the throne until the day she died. They said she kept a journal, that it held secrets that could break the families that opposed hers. Isabella's eyes darted around the room before returning to Alara's. Be careful, my dear. Some legacies are heavier than they appear. She then straightened up, her social mask back in place, and floated away to join the other women. The encounter left a cold knot in Alara's stomach. That night, after their guests had left, she told Lorenzo about the conversation. His expression grew still. My grandmother's journal, he murmured. I haven't thought of it in years. My father had it destroyed after she died. He said it was too dangerous. But what if it wasn't? Ilara pressed, her researcher's mind latching onto the mystery. What if it still exists? Lorenzo was silent for a long moment. If it does, and if it contains what they say it does, it would be a weapon of unimaginable power. It could topple empires. It could also get anyone who possesses it killed. A week later, a package arrived for Lorenzo. It was unmarked, delivered by a courier service that vanished before Luca could question them. Inside was a single aged key and a slip of paper with an address and a safe deposit box number at a private bank in Zurich. There was no note. Lorenzo stared at the key as if it were a venomous snake. This is her key, he said, his voice hollow. I remember it from when I was a boy. She wore it on a chain around her neck. The ghost of his grandmother had reached out from the grave. The journal existed, and someone, for reasons unknown, had just delivered the key to it into his hands. The decision was a moral and strategic minefield. To ignore it was to leave a weapon of mass destruction lying in a vault, vulnerable to anyone who might discover its existence. To retrieve it was to potentially unleash hell, to hold a secret that could destroy countless lives, including, potentially, their own. They stood in his study, the key lying on the desk between them. What do we do? Ilara asked. Lorenzo looked from the key to her, his gaze steady. We are not our parents, Ilara. We do not rule through fear and secrets. We rule through strength and transparency. He picked up the key, his jaw set. But we cannot leave this for others to find. We go to Zurich. Together, we retrieve the journal, and then we decide, together, what to do with the truth. It was the most dangerous mission of their lives. They were walking into a vault that held the sins of a past generation, a past that was reaching out to threaten their future. But as Ilara looked at her husband, at the resolve in his eyes, she felt no fear. They had faced down rivals and threats. They had built a life from love and trust. They would face this ghost too. Together. The teacher and the Mafia boss, partners in everything, even this. Zurich was a city of crisp, clean lines and silent, impenetrable wealth, a stark contrast to the sun-drenched, emotional landscape of their home. The bank was a fortress of discretion, all marble and mahogany, where voices were hushed and fortunes were hidden from the world. Lorenzo's presence commanded immediate, nervous attention. They were ushered into a private viewing room, the air cold and still. The safe deposit box was brought to them, a long, sleek metal container that held the weight of a buried past. Lorenzo inserted the key. The lock turned with a soft, definitive click that echoed in the silent room. He lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not a single journal but 3. They were bound in worn, dark leather, their spines cracked with age. Alongside them lay a sealed envelope, yellowed with time, with a single name written on it in an elegant, spidery hand. Lorenzo. His grandmother had known, or hoped it would be him. He picked up the envelope first, his hand steady but his face a mask of profound gravity. He broke the brittle seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. He read it silently, his eyes scanning the lines, and Ilara saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. He handed the letter to her. My dearest Lorenzo, it began. If you are reading this, you have become the man I always prayed you would be. A man of strength, but also of heart. I have watched your path from afar, and I know the burdens you carry. The world sees a crown. I know the weight of the thorns. These journals contain the truth I could never speak aloud. The alliances, the betrayals, the secrets that built our fortune and stained our souls. I recorded it all, not for vengeance, but for accountability. Power without memory is a monster. I give this to you not as a weapon, but as a choice. To bury the past, or to use its truths to build a cleaner future. The choice is yours. But know this. The man who married the teacher, the man who seeks a different path, he is the man I wrote this for. With all my love, grandmother. Ilara looked up from the letter, her eyes meeting Lorenzo's. The message was clear. His grandmother had approved of her, of their union, even from beyond the grave. She had seen the man he was becoming with Ilara by his side. He picked up the first journal, its leather cool against his skin. He didn't open it. Instead, he looked at Ilara. This is not just my legacy. It is ours, our choice. He held the journal out to her. You read it. The trust inherent in that gesture stole her breath. He was giving her the power to unearth his family's darkest secrets. She took the journal. It felt heavy, dense with hidden histories. She opened it. The pages were filled with the same sharp, elegant script she knew so well from his letters. But this was a woman's hand, more fluid, yet no less determined. She read entries detailing long-ago business dealings, political manipulations, names of judges and politicians who were secretly on the Conti payroll. It was a map of corruption that stretched back decades, but it was more than that. It was also a record of a woman's struggle to maintain her humanity in a world of brutal men. There were passages about Lorenzo as a boy, her fears for his gentle heart, her hopes that he would escape the life she was trapped in. She had loved him fiercely. As Ilara read, Lorenzo picked up the second journal. He flipped through it, his expression growing darker with each page. This one details the war with the Rossis, he said quietly, his voice tight. The assassinations, the retaliations, the reason for the blood feud that has lasted generations. He looked at her. It names the man who killed my uncle, and the man my father killed in return. The third journal was the most chilling. It contained a meticulously kept list of assets, people whose loyalty had been purchased or coerced, complete with their sins and secrets. This comprehensive blackmail ledger could destroy hundreds of lives, families, and careers. They sat in the cold, silent room for over an hour, the ghosts of the past swirling around them, given voice by the ink on these pages. They held enough explosive power to tear their city apart, to shatter the fragile peace Lorenzo had worked so hard to build. Finally, Lorenzo closed the journal he was holding. He looked at Ilara, his eyes clear and resolved. We cannot unleash this, he said. To use this as a weapon would make us no better than they were. It would be a reign of terror. But we can't just leave it, Ilara argued, though her heart agreed with him. Isabella knew about it. Others might. It's a threat as long as it exists. I know, he said. He gathered the 3 journals and the letter, and placed them back in the metal box. He closed the lid and locked it. Then he did something she never expected. He handed the key to the bank manager, who had been waiting silently outside. I want this box incinerated, Lorenzo commanded, his voice absolute. Today, with me as a witness, you will provide a certificate of destruction. Is that understood? The manager, wide-eyed, nodded mutely and took the key. They stood and watched through a thick glass window as the box and the 3 journals containing a century of secrets were fed into a roaring industrial furnace. The flames consumed the past, turning the truths, the sins, and the hopes of his grandmother into harmless ash. It was the ultimate act of defiance. He was choosing their future over the ghosts of the past. He was breaking the cycle. On the flight home, Lorenzo was quiet, staring out the window at the clouds below. She would be proud of you, Ilara said softly, taking his hand. You chose the harder path, the better path. He turned to her, his stormy eyes full of a love that had been tested and had held firm. I have you to thank for that, he said. You showed me that there is a strength in mercy, that our legacy doesn't have to be written in blood. It can be written in the life we build with Leo, in the good we do with our foundation. He brought her hand to his lips. We are not our past, Ilara. We are our choices. And I choose you. I choose our future. The teacher who had recognized a handwriting style had not just found her long-lost love. She had helped him find his soul. And together, they had just ensured that their kingdom would be built on a foundation of hope, not fear. The act of destruction was not an end, but a profound beginning. Burning the journals felt like cutting the final invisible chain tethering Lorenzo to the brutal legacy he had inherited. A new, lighter energy settled over their lives. The paranoia that had been a low-grade hum in the background of their existence began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose that was forward-looking, not defensive. They poured their energy into the Sophia Foundation, named for his grandmother. It became their shared mission, a positive force that channeled Lorenzo's considerable resources and influence into rebuilding communities, providing scholarships and creating the kind of opportunities his own violent upbringing had denied him. Ilara, with her empathy and organizational skills, was its public face and driving heart. At the same time, Lorenzo worked behind the scenes, using his formidable network to clear bureaucratic hurdles and ensure their efforts had maximum impact. They were no longer just a mafia boss and his teacher wife. They were philanthropists and visionaries. Leo flourished in this environment. Now 10, he was a bright, well-adjusted boy who split his time between his elite private school and the Foundation's community centers, where he happily tutored younger children in reading. Utterly unaware of the dark legacy he had been spared, he called Ilara Mom now, the word a balm on the old hidden wound of her childless years. Their love, tested by secrets and solidified by shared purpose, deepened into something unshakable. It was in the quiet moments, planning the Foundation's gala over morning coffee, debating which new project to fund, watching Leo score his first goal at a soccer game. It was a partnership in its purest form. One evening, on the anniversary of their first date, Lorenzo took her back to the opera. This time there were no challenging rivals, no power plays. They were simply a celebrated couple, admired for their work and their obvious devotion to each other. In the darkness of the private box, his hand found hers. "Do you remember the first time we were here?" He murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "You were so brave. You stared down Antonio without flinching." "I had you beside me," she whispered back. "That makes all the difference." During the intermission, an elderly, distinguished-looking man approached them. "Don Valenti, Signora Valenti," he said, his voice respectful. "I am Alberto Rossi." The name sent a jolt through Ilara. Rossi, the old enemy. The family of the blood feud is detailed in the burned journals. Lorenzo's posture remained relaxed, but she felt the subtle shift in him. A readiness now instinctive. "Signor Rossi," Lorenzo replied, his tone neutral. "I wanted to thank you," Rossi said, his eyes sincere. "The community center your foundation built in our old neighborhood. It has given my grandchildren a place to go, a safe place. It has changed things." He looked from Lorenzo to Ilara. "My father, and yours? They would not understand this, but I do. Thank you for breaking the cycle." He gave a slight formal bow and moved away. Lorenzo stood perfectly still for a moment, then let out a long, slow breath. He looked at Ilara, and in his eyes she saw a peace so profound it brought tears to her own. The war was truly over, not won through violence, but ended through an act of unexpected grace. They had built a bridge where their fathers had built a wall. Later that night, as they lay in bed, the city lights painting soft patterns on the ceiling, Lorenzo turned to her. "It's because of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "None of this would exist without you. The foundation, the peace, this happiness. You walked into my life, and you rewired my entire world." He propped himself up on an elbow, looking down at her, his expression serious. "I have a new proposition for you." "Another one?" She teased, smiling. "I think you've proposed every major life change I've had in the last few years." He didn't smile back. "I want to step down." The words hung in the air, stunning her into silence. "Step down?" "From the business," he clarified. "The remaining interests. I've been divesting for years. Luca can handle what's left. He's more than ready. I want to be done. Fully, completely legitimate. I want to be just Lorenzo Valenti, philanthropist. Leo's father. Your husband." Ilara's heart swelled until she thought it would burst. This was the final surrender. The ultimate commitment to the future they had built together. He was giving up the last vestiges of his power, his identity, for them. "Are you sure?" she breathed. "It's all I'm sure of," he said, his gaze steady. "I don't want that world touching Leo or you. Ever again. I want our story to be about the foundation, about our family, about us, not about the shadow I used to be." He leaned down and kissed her, a slow, deep kiss that was a vow in itself. "So what do you say? Will you be the wife of a boring, full-time philanthropist?" She laughed, the sound joyous and free. "I can't think of anything I'd love more." The transition was swift and silent. There was no announcement, no power vacuum filled with violence. Lorenzo Valenti, the fearsome Don, ceased to exist. In his place was Lorenzo Valenti, the generous benefactor, the dedicated family man. The teacher and the former Mafia boss had written their own ending. And it was a happy one. Years later, at Leo's college graduation, they sat in the sun-drenched quad, a proud, ordinary family. Leo was giving his valedictorian speech, his voice strong and clear, talking about the importance of using one's privilege to lift others. Ilara looked at her husband, his hair now silvered at the temples, his hand holding hers tightly, his eyes shining with pride for his son. The journey flashed before her. The anonymous letters, the homework assignment, the dangerous love, the shared battles, the conscious choice to build instead of destroy. She had started out grading a child's paper, recognizing a script from her past. She had ended up helping to rewrite a man's destiny, and in doing so, had found her own. The past was a closed book. Its darkest pages mercifully turned to ash. The future was a blank page, and they would continue to fill it, together. Always. The final transition was not an event, but a quiet, profound settling. The last of the shadowy holdings were dissolved, the final business connections severed with a handshake, and a generous, discreet severance that ensured loyalty through gratitude, not fear. Luca, now the undisputed head of what remained of the operational side, became a trusted friend and a regular, if slightly intimidating, guest at family dinners. The fortress-like penthouse remained their home, but its purpose had transformed. It was no longer a command center. It was a sanctuary, filled with the evidence of a life richly lived. Leo's engineering textbooks, Ilara's lesson plans scattered beside Lorenzo's foundation reports, family photos from ski trips and beach vacations covering the walls where maps of territories once hung. Their lives became a purposeful public service. Lorenzo, freed from the constant drain of managing a double life, poured his formidable intellect and energy entirely into the Sophia Foundation. He discovered a talent for high-level diplomacy, brokering partnerships between corporations and nonprofits with the same skill he had once used to broker illicit deals. He was respected, even revered, in circles that would have once crossed the street to avoid him. Ilara continued to teach, her classroom a grounding constant. She was Ms. Vance to her students, Signora Valenti at foundation galas, and mom to the young man she had helped raise. Her life was a perfect, if complex, tapestry, and she loved every thread of it. Leo graduated at the top of his class in engineering, his quiet intensity having found its perfect outlet in the clean, logical world of design and physics. He got a job at a prestigious firm, his future bright and entirely his own, unshadowed by the legacy he had narrowly escaped. On the day he moved into his first apartment, a proud, bittersweet milestone, Lorenzo clasped his son's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how proud I am of the man you've become," he said. "You are everything I ever hoped for." Leo hugged him tightly. "I had a good teacher," he said, smiling at Ilara over his father's shoulder. The circle was complete. The boy who had once needed help with his Odysseus homework was now a man building his own Odyssey. Years continued to flow, a gentle, rewarding river. They traveled the world for the foundation, their partnership as strong in a refugee camp as it was in a corporate boardroom. Their love, having survived the fires of its beginning, settled into a deep, abiding warmth, a constant, comforting presence. One crisp autumn evening, they found themselves back at the university library, the very place where their story had secretly begun. They were there to dedicate a new wing, funded by the foundation, in the name of intellectual freedom and anonymous benefactors. As they stood before the gathered faculty and students, Lorenzo at the podium, Ilara felt the ghost of her 20-year-old self, hunched over a book, dreaming of a mysterious admirer. He finished his speech to warm applause, then turned to her, his eyes soft. "And I would be remiss," he said, his voice echoing in the hushed space, "if I did not thank the woman who inspired it all. The woman who, decades ago, sat in a carrel not far from here, her mind so brilliant it captivated a lonely young man from the shadows. He looked directly at her, and the years fell away. She didn't know it then, but her integrity, her passion, her light set me on the path that led here. To this moment, to this life. He stepped down from the podium and walked to her, taking both her hands in his, right there in the middle of the library. "Alara Vance Valenti," he said, his voice meant only for her, though the whole room could hear. "You are my first and greatest mystery. You are my last and deepest love. Every good thing I've ever done I did for you, for us." He leaned in and kissed her. Not a chaste public gesture, but a deep, heartfelt kiss that held the weight of a lifetime of shared secrets and hard-won joy. The library, the scene of their anonymous beginning, now witnessed their most public declaration. The students and professors erupted in applause, but Alara heard none of it. There was only him, the man whose handwriting she had recognized, the father of her student, the love of her life. Later they walked through the stacks, their footsteps quiet on the old floors. They found the very carrel where she used to study. A young woman occupied it, her head bent over a laptop, just as Alara's once had been. They shared a smile and moved on. "It's strange, isn't it?" Alara murmured, linking her arm with his. "To think it all started here, with a piece of paper slipped between the pages of a book." "It didn't start with the letters, my love," Lorenzo said, stopping and turning to face her. His stormy eyes were clear and full of a peace that had been a lifetime in the making. "It started the first time you walked into this library. The first time I saw you. The letters were just my desperate attempt to reach a light I thought I could never touch." He brushed a strand of silvering hair from her face. "You were always the beginning, and you will always be the end." They walked out of the library hand in hand, leaving the ghosts of their past behind, stepping into the twilight of a city they had helped to change. The Teacher and the Mafia Boss, a love story written in secret and lived in the open. A story that proved that sometimes the most dangerous gamble, the gamble on a mysterious handwriting, on a second chance, on love itself, was the only one worth taking. Time, which had once moved in heart-pounding leaps and terrifying free-falls, settled into a gentle, golden rhythm. They grew old together, not with the bitterness of regret, but with the profound satisfaction of a life fully and courageously lived. Their hair silvered, their steps slowed, but the fire between them never dimmed. It banked into a deep, enduring warmth that needed no grand gestures, only the quiet assurance of the other's presence. The Sophia Foundation became their lasting monument, a thriving entity that had long outgrown its origins and taken on a life of its own, run by a new generation of idealists they had mentored. They had built something that would outlive them, a true and positive legacy. Leo married a brilliant, kind-hearted architect, and they gave Lorenzo and Alara 2 grandchildren, a serious little girl with her grandfather's stormy eyes and a boisterous boy with his grandmother's easy smile. Their home, once a silent fortress, now echoed with the shrieks and laughter of children, the ultimate symbol of their victory over the past. Lorenzo, in his grandfatherhood, discovered a softness he never knew he possessed. He was often found on the floor of the library, building elaborate block towers only to have them gleefully demolished by a toddler, his laughter a rich, joyful sound that filled the house. He told them sanitized, fairy tale versions of the Greek myths, his voice a gentle rumble where once commands had been issued. He was, finally and completely, at peace. Alara watched him with these children, her heart so full it ached. This was the man she had saved. Not from bullets or rivals, but from the crushing loneliness of a life without love, without light. She had taken the gamble, trusted the ghost from her past, and had been rewarded with this, a family, a purpose, a love that had spanned decades. On the morning of their 40th wedding anniversary, Lorenzo led her, their steps slow and synchronized, to their spot on the terrace. The city had changed around them, new skyscrapers piercing the sky, but their view remained a constant companion through every season of their lives. The olive tree he had planted was now a gnarled, majestic giant, its branches a testament to the deep roots it had put down. 40 years, he said, his voice, though older, still holding the resonant timbre that had once made her knees weak. He held her hands, his grip still strong and sure. It feels like a lifetime, and it feels like a single breath. He looked at her, his stormy eyes, now framed by a lifetime of laugh lines, still seeing only her. Do you remember the homework assignment? A slow smile spread across her face. How could I forget? I thought I was going to have a heart attack right there in my classroom. That piece of paper was the best thing that ever happened to me, he said, his tone utterly serious. It brought you back to me. It gave me a second chance I never deserved. He reached into the pocket of his sweater and pulled out a small, faded, cream-colored envelope. Her breath hitched. It was the same heavy paper, the same sharp, elegant script on the front, this time spelling her name. Ilara. You kept one? She whispered, her eyes filling with tears. Just one, he said softly. The first one I ever wrote. I couldn't bring myself to destroy it. I hid it away. I thought, perhaps for a day like today. With trembling fingers, she opened it. The words inside were simple, the beginning of everything. I saw you today. You were arguing about poetry. You were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. She looked up at him, the tears now streaming freely down her face. You never showed me this one. I was too afraid, he admitted. It was too raw, too real. The others were intellectual games. This one was just the truth. He took the letter from her, folded it carefully, and tucked it back into his pocket. Then he took both her hands again. Ilara Vance Valenti, you have been the single, constant, glorious surprise of my existence. You took a man forged in violence and taught him how to love. You gave me a son, a family, a reason to be better. You are my greatest adventure. He didn't get down on one knee. His knees weren't what they used to be, but the look in his eyes was the same as it had been all those years ago in his study. I have already spent my life with you, but will you promise me the next one? However, it may come. Will you marry me, all over again? The question, so perfectly them, broke her open and put her back together in the same instant. She laughed through her tears, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. Yes, you impossible, wonderful man. Yes, for this life and the next. Always. He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of 40 years of shared history, of passion and peace, of arguments and forgiveness, of a love that had not just endured, but had triumphed. That evening, their family gathered around them for a quiet celebration. Leo and his wife, their grandchildren, and a few close friends. The table was loud and happy, a far cry from the silent, intimidating dinners of Lorenzo's youth. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of gold and violet, Lorenzo stood, tapping his glass gently. The table fell quiet. He looked around at the faces of his family, his gaze finally resting on Ilara. A long time ago, he began, his voice strong and clear. A very lonely and lost young man saw a woman in a library, and he knew his life would never be the same. He was too afraid to approach her, so he wrote her letters instead. He never dreamed she would one day be his wife. He never dreamed he would deserve her. He smiled at Ilara, a smile of such profound love and gratitude that it silenced the room. She taught me that the past does not have to define the future. The greatest strength is not in ruling through fear, but in leading with love. She taught me how to be a father, a husband, a man. He raised his glass. To Ilara, my teacher, my love, my miracle. The toast was echoed around the table, but Alara only had eyes for him. Later, as the stars came out, they sat together on their bench under their olive tree. The city glittered below, a kingdom they had helped shape, but their world was here, in this quiet space between them. "We did it, didn't we?" she said softly, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We wrote our own story." He wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close against the chill of the evening. "We did," he murmured into her hair. "And it was a better story than I could have ever imagined." The journey that had begun with a secret admirer's note in a college library, that a child's homework assignment had reignited, had led here. To this peace, to this love, to this perfect, quiet ending, which was, in truth, no ending at all, but a beautiful, everlasting always.